There we go. Okay, so it's good to see everybody. Thanks for your patience in not being able every week to have this class based on, like last week in Rhode Island, visiting my granddaughter. And by the way, my son and daughter-in-law too, but you know, the granddaughter takes precedence. And this week's portion is BeShalach. The story of the Exodus from Egypt reaches its climax in this portion, in which even though it was described last week that we were leaving Egypt, here is what happens as they leave, and the song of the sea. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. And one more person coming in. All right, I just said the bracha, and the portion BeShalach begins on page 399 in Eitz Chaim. Whatever edition of Chumash you have, look for the portion in the table of contents, BeShalach, chapter 13, beginning with verse 17. And I actually do want to start with the very first verse, because there's interesting commentary on that in terms of how the verse is translated. Okay, so if we're all there, 399, Exodus 13, verse 17. Vayehi BeShalach paro et ha'am, velo nacham Elohim derech eretz plishtim, ki karov hu, ki amar Elohim, pen yinachem ha'am, bir otam milchama, v'shavu mitzrayimah. I'm going to translate it literally and then look at the translation here in the Chumash and see what the differences are. When Pharaoh sent the people, or cast out the people, and God did not, so Nacham usually means to comfort, like lenachem is to comfort. Here, it just means to lead. I'm not an etymologist, so I can't explain the difference, why nun chet mem could be to comfort or to lead. But here it seems clear from context, it means to lead. And God did not lead by way of the land of the Philistines, because it was close. So the word there, ki, I translate because it was close. So when Pharaoh sent out the people, and God did not lead by way of the land of the Philistines, because it was close, because God said, in case the people, and here's another translation of nun chet mem, because and in case the people change their mind, or and it says here change of heart, change their mind when they see war, and they return to Egypt, or they will return to Egypt. So the grammar isn't great here. The question though, so it seems as if God is leading the people on another path instead of the direct path to the land of Israel. So in other words, if you've ever used Google Maps or maps from Apple, like if you have a Mac and go to, or an iPhone and use their app called Maps, or if you use Google's Maps, you get and you put in a destination, and you put in your location as the starting place. So imagine you start the land of Goshen, and then you put in land of Israel into Google Maps. Imagine if you could have done that 3,000 years ago. There's a direct path. So picture the map of the Middle East in your mind's eye. And if you're in northern Egypt, the best way to get to the land of Israel is along the top of the Sinai Peninsula. And if you go on the top of the Sinai Peninsula, you'll eventually get to Gaza if you just follow the map. So you cross. There was no Suez Canal then, so you can just cross right over into the desert. And as the Sinai curves into Israel proper, that's Gaza, and Gaza is where the Philistines are. So God then, according to this verse, chose a different path. And the reason given here is that there would be war with the Philistines. And if you walk that distance, it would be okay. If you're walking with 600,000 people, it would take a while, but you could possibly do it in a week. Walk from Egypt, where they are in Egypt, to get to Israel. So it should only take a week. And in a week's time, if they went that way, by way of the land of the Philistines, they would be greeted with war. Okay, and they would want to, instead of engaging in battle with the Philistines, the people might want to return to Egypt. And there goes God's plans. So a couple of things about this before we look below the line. So it's just fascinating to me here in verse 17. We've just had the 10 plagues. So if God is able to do the 10 plagues and bring those plagues to Egypt, don't you think God could prevent the Israelites from engaging in war with the Philistines? In other words, couldn't that be another miracle that God could perform for them? Get into the land of Israel in a week's time, and there won't be war with the Philistines. That will be an extra miracle. But instead, God says, I have to lead the people another way because I can't stop the Philistines from engaging in war with the Israelites. So God can stop the mightiest empire on earth at the time, the Egyptian empire and Pharaoh. God can stop the Egyptians, but God cannot stop the Philistines. So that's question number one. Question number two is, well, maybe it's not about God, maybe it's about the people. And perhaps God might be recognizing who the people of Israel are, and no matter what kind of miracle God could bring for them, the people are just not ready yet to, even if they were engaged in battle and God caused them to win, the people God realizes are just not ready yet. And if they went that way, there wouldn't be any Mount Sinai, there wouldn't be the 10 Commandments, and there wouldn't be the giving of the Torah, or it would all be done in a different way. So there's just lots of questions from this verse about intention, God's intention, the people's intention, the people's readiness, God's readiness to deal with the people, these kinds of things. Jan, you have a question.
I do. So my question is, could it be that as the Jews left Egypt, they were a little like emotionally fragile? They had just been slaves, right? And their parents, their grandparents, etc., had been slaves. And
Right.
so like the first thing that they got as free people last week was they got the calendar, right? Because slaves
Right.
don't control their time. All of a sudden you have a calendar, you can control your time, right? Now that you're a free person. And so maybe it's almost like when a new business starts, you have to do some team building.
Yes.
And kind of build them up. So instead of just sending them into this new place in this fragile state, maybe it's, part of the reason to spend a little time in the, maybe not 40 years, but spend a little bit of time in the desert is to do some of that team building and build up the people and build up their trust in God. Because after having come from slavery, my understanding is many of the Jews came, but there are some that said, I don't believe in this, and they stayed in Egypt. They didn't go to Sinai.
So it depends on the Midrash. And so according to the Torah, all the Jews left. Okay, that's the straight reading of the text. Well, first of all, what you're saying is a reasonable explanation, and we'll see some of that below the line when we get to it momentarily. So yes, and the only problem with that is, and the problem with this verse from the very Torah is that at the end of the portion has the people engage in battle with the Amalekites. So 3 days after they leave Egypt and cross the sea, we have extensive description about the manna and the miracle of the manna that's going to fall for every day until they get to the land of Israel. And then that was last week's. Right. No, it's this this portion has, well, where is the Amalekites? Is it last week's portion, the end? Just a second. So it's I'm sorry.
The end of last week ends with the tefillin.
No, right. So it's the end of this week. I was getting confused. The end of this week's portion, you'll see, is the battle with the Amalekites, chapter 17. So if God is afraid of the people not being ready to engage in battle yet because of the Philistines, why isn't God worried about the Amalekites? And they have to engage in battle, and there's a miracle there. So the question still stands, Jan, for you and for all of us, that the commentary below the line, we'll see in a moment, raises. If the people aren't ready for battle because they've been slaves and they just aren't really a people yet, and they haven't bought into what the mission is of being an Israelite, so therefore they're not ready to engage in battle yet, then why are they engaging in battle with the Amalekites? So I don't have an answer to that question.
Is it possible that one is like the high school team versus the pro team? It's easier to beat the high school team than the pro team. I don't know. That's my last
I don't
thought.
think so. Amalekites are pretty dangerous. So maybe they're rogue versus a well-trained army. I don't know. Or maybe it's different traditions of authorship here that are coming together in our story for how in terms of all the miracles that happened for Israel leaving Egypt. Maybe one strand of tradition has the battle with the Amalekites as the last miracle that's happening on behalf of the people, or maybe another strand doesn't have the Amalekite, but the Amalekite strand is a pretty strong strand. See Deuteronomy, which has the commandment about the Amalekites also, and see the holiday of Purim, where we have that, and also the book of Samuel, where we have King Saul leading a battle against the Amalekites. So the Amalekites, pretty strong tradition, stemming from the book of Genesis, because Amalek is listed as a descendant of Esau. So the Amalekites, a pretty strong tradition there. So again, I don't have an adequate answer to this, and part of Torah study is not necessarily to come up with an answer, but to rather study in a way that questions are raised So to help us understand a little bit more about the Torah itself and be challenged by the text. The text is not perfect, and the text is challenging. So if the question about that we see in the first verse of our portion is to protect people from battle, because the people aren't ready yet, then we still have the question 4 chapters later, why are the people engaging in battle? Okay, let's look below the line and see some of the other philosophical questions that arise from this verse. So, God did not lead them by way of the land of the Philistines, although it was nearer. So, translating the word key there, not as because, but although. The Hebrew word translated here as although has several different meanings. The commentators differ in their understanding of the word and of God's purpose in leading Israel by a longer, less direct route. Some see it as an act of kindness and consideration on God's part. One commentator translates ki karovu as because God was near to them and loved them, and therefore did not want to risk having some of them killed in a battle with the Philistines. So instead of that, instead of translating it like I did, and what the straightforward translation is, God did not lead them by way of the land of the Philistines because it was close, rather as because God was close. The word who, hey, vav, aleph, can be he, he, or it can be it. So it's understood as it, that is the way to the land of the Philistines. So that's the it, right? That we understand here. But the hey vav aleph could be referring to God. God did not lead them by way of the land of the Philistines because God was close to them. And how was God close to them, and how did that exhibit itself? Because God said maybe the people will see war and want to return to Egypt. So that's a legitimate way of translating this and getting the understanding of God's involvement here in determining the way out. Okay, so others, we go on in the commentary, others give it a psychological interpretation. So, Rashi, God did not lead Israel through Philistine territory precisely because it was close, and it would have been too tempting to become discouraged and return to Egypt, right? So it's the easiest way, shortest way to get to Israel. But if you get war there, doesn't matter how short it was, it would be a way filled with discouragement. Ramban, Nachmanides, 300 years after Rashi, although the way through the Philistine territory was more direct, God was afraid that the people would be discouraged if they had to fight their way through, right? So, people would die, it would be difficult, and some people would be saying, what's the use of all these miracles to take us out of Egypt if only we're going to be dying here in war? So, finally, some see the long route as necessary for the Israelites to develop the qualities they would need to conquer and settle the promised land, kind of what Jan was saying before, right? So the people aren't ready yet as a people to become a people. And so you need to do that first in order to then be able to act as a nation, which is to settle land and to engage probably in battle. And then Ibn Ezra says, God did not want them to arrive at the promised land too soon. Having been slaves all their lives, they would not have been prepared to conquer Canaan until they had a lengthy experience of freedom. So they just need the time to be a people, not necessarily to get the law, but to be a people. And they needed some more time. So, by the time we get to the book of Numbers, and they're leaving Mount Sinai. So they're at Mount Sinai for a year. It takes them 3 months to get to Mount Sinai, maybe 2.5 months, right? It's in the 3rd month after leaving. So 2.5 months to get to Mount Sinai. Then they spend a year there. What are they doing in that year? They're building the Mishkan. And they're hearing and learning the Torah from Moses, right? They have the experience of revelation at Mount Sinai. They build the Mishkan. They learn the Torah, and maybe not in that order. Maybe they learn the Torah, then build the Mishkan, and then they're ready to move. That's when Moses sends the scouts into the land of Israel. So they just needed a year before they're ready to go into Israel. It's what happened as a result of sending the scouts that they then wander for 39 more years. So they really only needed a year. Yes, someone. You have to unmute. Yeah. So I can't hear you. You have to unmute. Press the microphone button on the bottom. There you go.
It seems to me, not only were the people not ready, but it turns out that whole generation was not ready. And it turns out that a totally new generation.
Right. I mean, that's what the Torah teaches us.
Before they went into Israel. Yeah.
Right. So that's what the Torah teaches us in the book of Numbers. And that's what the commentary in the book of Numbers says as well, that the people just still had the slave mentality and were just not ready to enter. I mean, that's one way, but we don't know for sure, and I'm not being heretical by asking this question. We don't even know what the real story of the Exodus is.
Yeah.
This is the religious story of the Exodus from Egypt. Bible scholars and biblical historians, that is, historians of the people of Israel from the time of the Bible, that's what I mean, have different understandings and theories about, and that also gets to another point Jan said. Were all of the family of Jacob in the land, in Egypt to begin with? Did all of them leave Egypt at the same time? We really don't know. There are different theories out there that different historians promote that suggest maybe half of the tribes went down to Egypt and the other half stayed in the land of Israel. And the rest of the Bible is about the incorporation or the lack of success of incorporating all of the tribes of Israel. Maybe that's what the book of Judges is about. Again, these theories exist today, so we really don't know. All we do know that as a people, as a Jewish people, the story of the Exodus from Egypt is part of what it means to be Jewish. It's part of the Jewish story, right? And it's reinforced by saying Kiddush every Friday night. So when we say Kiddush, we might not be aware of everything we're saying if we say the Kiddush in Hebrew, and it's kind of like, God forbid, like saying the mourner's Kaddish. You say the words, don't really understand what you're saying. It's just inbred and it's memorized. But Zecher L'Tziat Mitzrayim, in memory of the Exodus from Egypt, right? And also Maaseh Bereshit, to remember the creation of the world. So 2 reasons for why we observe Shabbat. So every week we remember the Exodus from Egypt. So like I said, it's part and parcel of everything we do. 3 times a day, the Exodus from Egypt is in our prayers as well. So this story is important. How it happened is less important. But for the Torah, what's important is God's role in making it happen. Okay, so we don't necessarily have to believe that the Exodus happened this way. We do have to believe that there is the potential for God to intervene in our lives. That's the religious message coming out of this story and out of the Torah in general. All right, now we continue in the commentary. Maimonides, that we're on the 6th line. Maimonides says that God wanted to accustom them to hardship to prepare them for the task of conquering and settling Canaan. That's why going a longer way would be the ability to face some hardship to so that they learn how to become a people that way. Some commentators specifically spell out the implication that sometimes the harder way of doing something turns out to be the better way. There's a long way which is short, and a short way which is long, right? So when something comes to us too easily, instead of being hard earned, we don't always appreciate it. Okay, so that's another way to understand the long way into the land of Israel. The Midrash understands the phrase God did not lead them as God was not comforted, taking the word nacham not as lead, but as was comforted. Although God rejoiced over the Israelites who were redeemed from Egypt, God was not comforted for those who died without seeing the deliverance. Okay, so different understandings here. I think the point still stands about the battle with the Amalekites, and that, so those who want to interpret the Torah as saying here that God was keeping the people in mind have a problem when we get to the end of the portion, BeShalach, when we face the Amalekites. There's a little thing that I want to get to. I want to go kind of out of order and point this out in terms of the how we understand the Hebrew, because there's a verse at the end of the Torah portion. So I wanted to make sure we got here that that highlights something that is in the Hebrew that we don't see in the English translation. So if we turn to page 420, verse 3. So it's the third line on the page, and it's chapter 17, verse 3. So whatever edition of Chumash you have, look to chapter 17, verse 3, and it's near the beginning of the seventh Aliyah, beginning of chapter 17. So 420, the third line on the page. People are complaining about being thirsty. Where is the water going to come from? And so there's a miracle that's about to happen to make the water that they're standing in front of sweet. Okay, so it's the manner of the complaint that is expressed here in verse 3. Vayitzma sham ha'am lamayim. The people there were thirsty for water. Vayalen ha'am al Moshe. And the people complained to Moses. Vayomer, and Moses said, Lama zeh, no, the people said as one, in one voice, Vayomer. And instead of Vayomru, which would be the plural, it's Vayomer. And he said, Lama zeh he'elitanu. Why did you bring us up? He'elitanu. Why did you bring us up, Mimitzrayim, from Egypt, lehamit oti, to cause me to die, right? Look at the English. The English doesn't say that. Why did you bring us up from Egypt to kill us? The English translation changes the Hebrew. Why did you bring us up from Egypt to kill me, ve'et banai, and my children, ve'et miknai, and my flocks, bat sama, with thirst? So the Hebrew does this several times throughout the Torah, shifting the tense in that way in the verse, or the noun form from plural to singular or back and forth like that. And the English translation doesn't reflect it. Okay, the English translation reflects a different understanding, I think, but the commentary is going to point out in a moment here. So the people are complaining to Moses about being thirsty. First, they're saying as in one voice, Vayomer. So in what that is third person singular, Vayomer. So it's not they said, it's he said. So the people, as one are saying, why did you bring us up out of Egypt to kill me? So that's wrong use of English. If you're using us, it should be us or first person plural for the rest of the sentence. Why did you bring us up from Egypt to kill us and our children? It should say, and our flocks, but it doesn't. Why bring us up to kill me and my children and my flocks? Okay, so if we look below the line, the text reads literally, why did you bring us out of Egypt to kill me and my children? When the Israelites were leaving Egypt in triumph and the future looked glorious, they thought in terms of us, all of us together. But when times became hard and there was not enough to eat and drink, they stopped saying us and began to speak of me and my children. So, reflected here with what we just read on page 399 is the whole development of the people as a people. And going through the good times, like the Exodus from Egypt, is one thing for the people to speak with one voice. It's another for them to speak with one voice and recognize each other's value to the community when bad things are happening. Right, so they're speaking in one voice about complaining about being thirsty, but then they're switching to themselves. I'm thirsty. My children are going to die. My flocks are going to die. So so why I wanted to bring this up right now, even though we just looked at the first verse, is this whole idea of the development, the psychological development of the people of Israel, and how long it takes to do that. And we're not even sure that by the time we get to the end of Deuteronomy, that the people are fully developed as a people yet. Okay, the book of Joshua, the book of Judges is going to reflect that. And in fact, the entire rest of the Bible will reflect that. How much of human nature can change as a result of God's intervention in our lives? Does it work? And you would think the Torah is trying to plead with us to make it work. And that by reading the story of our of our ancestors and seeing how miracles were wrought for them right there in front of them, even then it was so challenging for the people to be together as a people, united in every way, how much more difficult it is for us today to be united as a people. We're more fractured as a people than we've ever been in the history of the Jewish people. We're more diverse throughout the world geographically than we've ever been, and we're more diverse religiously and culturally than we've ever been. So it is not just the geography of being united in the state of Israel today, but there's the other. Not just having the land, you need the culture as well. And culturally, like if you go on Times of Israel today, one of the headline articles is that the Minister of Education of Israel, who's from the far right, one of those political parties, I believe the Otzma party, wants to propose legislation that Jews in the diaspora, that's us, Jews in America and Jews outside of the land of the state of Israel, cannot contribute towards pluralistic education in the state of Israel. That's what he wants to propose, that pluralistic educational enterprises in Israel would not be allowed to receive money from outside of Israel. This is further another example of how the state of Israel is not just the community of Israel being fractured, but the state of Israel being fractured from the rest of the Jewish community around the world. And so among all the headlines going on in Israel today about judicial reform and the terrorist actions that happened over this past Shabbat, this should receive just as much of a headline for American Jews all those other headlines as well. And that, so anyway, so we go far afield from what the Torah was teaching about leading the people and taking their time so that the people can become a people and united, and how we see that for 3,000 years, how difficult it has been, if not impossible, to have the people of Israel, the Jewish people, the 13 million, 14 million Jews in the world today, how nearly impossible it is for us to be united. Yes, Lori.
Yeah, just clarification. Is that very literal? Like if I wanted to give a donation to the conservative movement in Israel, that would, is that the type of thing that's covered?
I'm not sure. I really don't know the details of that.
Okay.
The conservative movement in Israel, Masorti, does sponsor a track in the public school system in Israel. In other words, if parents come together, it's like a charter school. There's a charter school system track within the Israeli public school system. So if enough parents come together, they can start a charter school. So there's one track known as Tali. It's a Hebrew abbreviation, and I forget what the abbreviation stands for. It doesn't matter, but it's from the Masorti movement to create a religious, an alternative, pluralistic religious education. So right now the choice is a completely secular public education in Israel, or a religious public education in Israel, but the religious public education is Orthodox. So if you are a non-Orthodox Jew living in Israel, or if you're a secular Jew who wants your child to learn some religious values, but not in an Orthodox way, there is an option of this Tali school system. So the question is then, how does this Minister of Education deal with that Tali, and whether Jews from outside of Israel are to contribute towards the Tali system? So it's very complicated, and but it's something that we should be aware of and should bring up to the to Israel's ambassador to the United States, who happens to be the president of Israel's brother. So we should, if this gets traction in Israel, and we should definitely have a letter writing campaign to the Israeli ambassador here in Washington, D.C., and complain about this. But anyway, again, I didn't mean this for this to be an Israeli political discussion. I meant this to be a discussion about the development of the people of Israel as a people, as expressed in this week's portion, and how difficult it is for the people ever to be united around the cause. And we would think the easiest time for the people to be united around the cause is when a miracle happens. And even with that, when a miracle happens, the people still forget that the miracle happened. And the very next thing after crossing the sea is that they're complaining about water. So, how could they complain when miracles just happen? And they should have said, God provided for us before, we're thirsty now. We know that God will provide for us again. And that's never in the language. It's rare that you'd find that religious language in the rest of the Bible. It's more frequent to have the people complain about something or to forget about God than for the people to say, we believe in God, we are at a crossroads, we need God's help. That is rare to find in the Bible. And it's just fascinating that is part of the psyche of the Israelite people and subsequently the Jewish people. Let's see. I wanted that there's length that we don't have the time. Okay, so let's continue this discussion by looking at a verse on page 412. Yeah. Okay. So it's it's based on what I just said here. 4:12 verses 22 and the next couple of sentences. So Miriam just leads the people in song after Moses leads the people in song. And we're on 4:12, chapter 15, verse 22. Chapter 15, verse 22. Vayasa Moshe et Yisrael miyam suf. Moses led the people in a journey. So Nacham is how God led the people that we just saw at the beginning of the portion. Here, Vayasa is Moses leading the people, but it's from the word linsoa, to travel. So that's why there's a dot in the letter Samach to point out that the nun is missing from the root. So that's the little bit of grammar that I know, is that sometimes there's a dot in a letter to show that there's a letter missing. So Vayasa is how to remind us that the root is nun samach aleph, to travel. So Vayasa Moshe Yisrael miyam suf means Moses led the people on a journey from the Sea of Reeds. Vayetzu el midbar shur, and they left. They went to, or they went on to the wilderness or the desert of Shur. Vayelchu shloshet yamim bamidbar. They went 3 days journey in the desert. Velo matzu mayim. They didn't find water. Vayavo'u marata. They came to Marah. Velo yachlu lishtot mayim mimara. They weren't able to drink water from Marah. Ki marim hein, because the people were bitter or the water was bitter. Al Kain, therefore, Karashama Marah. Therefore, they called its name Marah, the place that they camped, bitter. Vayilonu ha'am al Moshe lemor manishte. The people complained to Moses, saying, "What will we drink?" Okay, now, not what will I drink, what we saw on page 420. Not what will I drink, but what will we drink? So maybe they're united still after the miracle of crossing the sea. What will we drink? So let's look below the line on 4:12. After crossing the sea, the Israelites promised to be faithful to God forever. A mere 3 days later, however, they were complaining, yearning to be back in Egypt. Although they had been slaves in Egypt, they had been free of the responsibilities of making choices, ordering their lives, and providing food for their families. While life now offered more possibilities, it made new demands. Okay, so to be free, it's great to be free. What a great miracle. But now there's responsibility, because you got to take care of yourself, as opposed to being a slave when your slave owner took care of you. So not in a good way, but still fed you like an animal. It may be that it's hard to sustain one's faith without enough food to eat. Or it may be that it's hard to nourish one's faith today on the basis of yesterday's miracle. That's what I wanted to think about for a moment. To nourish one's faith today on the basis of yesterday's miracle, right? So we are reminded all the time in our prayer book of miracles that happened in the past. When we light the candles for Hanukkah, we are reminded of the miracle that happened in Hanukkah 2,100 years ago. When we observe Passover, when we observe Purim, 2 holidays that are coming up, we're reminded of the miracles that happened on those 2 holidays. And it's supposed to sustain us. It's supposed to inspire us. But does it really work? That's the question the commentary is asking. Does yesterday's miracle sustain faith today? So as the commentary goes on, yesterday's miracle, however spectacular it may have been, grows stale overnight. The miracle doesn't last. Only the daily triumph over adversity endures. Jewish faith is not rooted in miracles. The generation that crossed the sea did not maintain their faith for more than 3 days after that event. Jewish faith is rooted in the daily experience of God's reality and God's goodness. So, I mean, this is an important religious idea that the commentary is promoting here. Remember, this is the conservative movement's edition of the Chumash, conservative movement dealing so the commentary expressing conservative movement ideology and here theology. What inspires us as a people is it's not waiting around for miracles and living on miracles past. It's rather seeing God's goodness today, and that's what we say in the Amida 3 times a day. We are modim anachnu lach. We are grateful to you, God, al nisecha shebachol yom imanu, for your miracles that are with us every day. Okay, so in other words, the purpose, the goal of Jewish living is to see our life as a miracle and everything that happens around us as a miracle. And so the goal is not to be just inspired by miracles past, but to understand that miracles do happen every single day. And the miracles from the littlest thing, like waking up in the morning, or seeing the wonders of nature around us, like waking up this morning and seeing the snow on the grass, a beautiful aspect of nature in that way. But seeing that as a miracle and not taking it for granted, and then having the goodness that we see in the world today, that should inspire us to true and righteous living. Okay, so as the commentary concludes, thus God changes tactics here. Instead of a spectacular miracle once in a generation, God works a small miracle, the manna, every day. The Talmud equates the two, providing everyone with enough to eat is as great a miracle as splitting the sea. Okay, so the manna becomes the daily miracle that the people see, and we don't hear from it again, actually. We don't hear of it again after this, but we just assume that the manna is falling every single day. And that we have to keep in the back of our minds when later on, when the people are complaining to Moses after hearing the report of the spies that they can't get into Israel. Well, wait a second, didn't manna just fall this morning? Don't we have proof of God's existence? Shouldn't we believe in God? So that's not part of the spy story in the book of Numbers, but that we have to keep that in mind, that the people are living with the miracle every day and yet are still denying or lacking faith in God. Okay, we'll stop here for today. Any thoughts or questions before we end? All right, so have a good rest of the day, everybody, and we'll see you next week for another.
Yasher Koach.
We'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Take care.
Have a good day, everybody.
You too.
Thank you.